My son looked me dead in the eye and said those words that would haunt me forever. "We don't have space for you anymore, Mom. You can keep the basement." The basement of the house I inherited from my own mother. The house where I changed his diapers, taught him to ride a bike, held him through every nightmare when his daddy walked out on us. What Josh didn't know was that this worthless basement held something worth more than his mortgage, something that would flip his world upside down by morning. I'm Linda, 65 years old, and I've been underestimated my whole life. But honey, you don't survive raising a child alone for 35 years, working double shifts until retirement, without learning how to play the long game. They thought they were kicking out a helpless old woman. They were about to meet a grandmother with nothing left to lose. This story will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Because what happened next proved that sometimes the person you think betrayed you is actually the one who's been protecting you all along. It started small, the way poison always does. You know how it is when you're trying to keep peace in the family. First, it was Josh asking if I could help with utilities this month. I said yes, because mothers always do, don't we? Then it was Megan telling me to knock before entering the nursery, in my own house. Then came the dinner curfew, cook before 6 p.m. only, like I was hired help. The sticky notes on my refrigerator were the final straw. Milk for Emily only. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own home? I told myself it was temporary stress from the new baby, but Megan's designer purses kept multiplying while she asked for grocery money. Josh worked the same job with the same salary, so where was this money coming from? That's when I started doing something I'd never done before, keeping receipts, all of them, in a little red folder, every grocery bill showing $200 organic steaks while I ate 99-cent ramen. Every lost credit card that kept appearing on luxury shopping sprees. Every utility bill that tripled when I was supposedly wasting electricity. But the cruelest cut came when I found my late husband's Purple Heart medal listed on eBay. Starting bid, $50. The seller, Meg Josh 2024. That's when I knew this wasn't about space or money. This was about erasing me completely. Late at night, I'd hear whispers through the walls. "I miss you too, Brian. Just be patient. It won't be much longer." Brian? Josh was snoring right next to her. I found restaurant receipts signed with names that weren't Josh's, designer clothes hidden in closets with tags still on, and a man's cologne-scented shirt in my laundry basket. Then came the phone call that changed everything. The bank called at 2 a.m., and when banks call at 2 a.m., you know it's never good news. They needed to verify my loan application for a second mortgage. $250,000 against my house that I'd paid off 5 years ago. The signature looked like mine, but I hadn't signed anything. That's when I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. It cost me $2,000 I didn't have. But desperation makes you do things you never thought possible. What he found shattered my world into a million pieces. 7 credit cards opened in my name. 2 car loans I'd never seen. A business loan for Josh's consulting company that didn't exist. They'd been planning this for 18 months. 18 months of looking me in the eye every morning, saying, "Good morning, Mom," while systematically destroying my financial life. The investigator showed me photographs that made my blood run cold. Josh and Megan at the bank, practicing signatures. Josh Googling, How to get power of attorney for elderly parent. Elderly. I was 65 and in perfect health. But in their minds, I was already dead and buried. But the betrayal went deeper than money. The investigator had uncovered Megan's real identity, a con artist with a criminal history spanning 3 states. Identity theft in Texas, fraud in California, and she was already married to someone else, Brian Matthews, since 2022. Josh's marriage was a complete sham. The woman who'd been sleeping in my son's bed, eating at my table, playing with a child she'd trained to call Josh Daddy, had been planning to take everything and disappear with another man's baby. Emily wasn't even Josh's daughter, and the birth certificate had been falsified. When I confronted the bank with evidence of the forged signatures, they froze all accounts pending investigation. The mortgage company demanded immediate payment of fraudulent loans. Josh's credit score plummeted overnight from excellent to nothing. Their perfect little world built on lies was crumbling faster than sand. Josh found Megan's phone unlocked one morning and saw months of messages to Brian. "She looks just like you, Daddy. Can't wait for us to have our own place." Photos of Emily, plans for their future together, discussions about how much money they'd have once they dealt with the old lady. The confrontation was explosive. Josh screamed at Megan, demanding explanations that never came. She packed her bags and disappeared that same night, taking Emily and 2 suitcases full of stolen jewelry I'd just noticed was missing from my bedroom. The house felt like a crime scene, silent and violated. But Josh's pain was just beginning. The private investigator's final report revealed that Megan had been using multiple identities across several states, targeting elderly parents of lonely adult children. She'd done this before, and we weren't her first victims. We were just the latest marks in a sophisticated long-term con. Josh lost his job when the criminal investigation became public. His coworkers started avoiding him, whispering about fraud and family drama. The mortgage payments became impossible without dual income, and the bank began foreclosure proceedings on what they now considered a compromised property. Within 2 months, Josh was living in his car, the same car I'd helped him buy for his 18th birthday. I'd see him at the 24-hour Walmart, parking far from the lights, but I knew his silhouette. A mother always knows her child, even in the darkness. He'd walk to McDonald's bathroom at 6 a.m. to wash his face for job interviews. The same McDonald's where we'd celebrated his Little League victories with Happy Meals. One morning, I followed him and watched him eat packets of free crackers for breakfast. The same crackers he used to feed to ducks when he was 7 years old. My heart broke in ways I didn't know were possible. This was my baby, living like a stranger, too proud or ashamed to ask for help. His coworkers had started a collection for Homeless Josh, the same man who used to brag about his investment property and his beautiful family. He never came to me for help. Maybe it was pride, maybe shame, or maybe he thought I'd say no after what he'd done. He didn't know that I drove by his work every day, just to make sure he was still alive. The knock came at 3 a.m., and it wasn't Josh. It was Emily, holding a social worker's hand, clutching a teddy bear I'd given her for her first birthday. The social worker's voice was gentle but professional. "Mrs. Patterson, we need emergency placement for Emily. Her mother was arrested for identity theft. Her father, well, he's not her biological father, and he's currently homeless." I looked at this little girl who'd been used as a weapon against me. Her eyes were red from crying, her clothes were dirty, and she was scared and alone. She looked up at me with those innocent eyes and whispered, "Can I stay with you, Grandma Linda? I promise I'll be good." That's when I realized something profound. Revenge against adults is one thing, but children are always innocent. This little girl had been a pawn in someone else's game, just like Josh and I had been. She didn't deserve to suffer for the sins of the adults who'd failed her. Josh came to get Emily the next morning. He stood in my doorway, broken and ashamed, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom, I don't deserve to ask, but—" he started, his voice cracking like when he was 7 years old and had broken something valuable. "She's fine. She's eating breakfast," I interrupted, watching his shoulders shake with relief and shame. We stood there, two adults who'd forgotten how to be family, separated by months of betrayal and pain. "I can't pay you," he whispered, and I could hear the little boy who used to worry about disappointing me. "Did I ask you to?" I replied, and that's when my grown, 33-year-old son broke down crying like the child who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I lost everything because I lost you first," he sobbed, and I held him while he fell apart in my arms. As I comforted him, I felt something thick in his jacket pocket, an envelope that would change everything I thought I knew about the last year of my life. Later that night, I found the envelope on my kitchen counter. Josh had left it there deliberately. Inside was a letter from a law firm and a check for $2.3 million. But it wasn't what I expected. The letter explained that Josh had been working with the FBI for 8 months, gathering evidence against a criminal organization that targeted families just like ours. Every cruel word, every humiliation, every moment, I thought he'd abandoned me. He'd been documenting evidence to bring down Megan's operation. The worthless basement they'd given me wasn't just storage. It had been Megan's meth lab, the source of all that mysterious money. Josh had been recording everything, collecting financial records, and working with federal agents to expose the entire network. The check was his reward for helping the DEA take down the biggest drug operation in our county's history. But more than that, it was compensation for the pain he'd caused me while protecting me from something far worse than financial fraud. Josh hadn't just lost everything. He'd risked everything to save me. While I thought he was betraying me, he was actually gathering evidence that would eventually put dangerous criminals behind bars and prevent other families from suffering the same fate. The investigation had required him to play along with Megan's schemes, to appear complicit in her plans, to let her believe she was successfully manipulating both of us. He'd had to watch me suffer, knowing that revealing the truth too early would compromise the entire operation and potentially put my life in danger. He'd been protecting me all along, even when it meant I hated him for it. The fake pregnancy announcement, the demand for space, even the cruel eviction from my own rooms. All of it had been theater designed to make Megan feel safe enough to reveal the full extent of her criminal network. As I read through the documents, I realized that my son had sacrificed his relationship with me to ensure that Megan and her associates would face justice. He'd endured months of knowing I thought he was the villain when he was actually the hero of this story. 6 months later, I received a call from Denver that put everything into perspective. An elderly woman was thanking me through tears. Your son's testimony helped convict the woman who stole my life savings. She's going to prison for 20 years because of what you and Josh did. Megan Patricia Wells, whose real name was actually Margaret Williams, had been running this elaborate scam for over a decade. Multiple families across 7 states, dozens of victims, all elderly parents who loved their children too much to see the truth. She'd perfected the art of finding vulnerable single parents, seducing them with promises of love and family, then systematically destroying their support systems while draining their resources. The FBI had been tracking her for 3 years, but she was too smart, too careful. She never left digital trails, never used the same identity twice, and always disappeared before anyone could build a case. Until Josh became her target and decided to fight back. When Josh first realized what was happening, he'd contacted the authorities immediately. But they told him what I'd feared. Without solid evidence, it would be his word against hers, and she'd simply vanish like she always did. The only way to stop her was to let her believe she was succeeding while secretly documenting everything. The basement had been her masterstroke. She'd convinced Josh that storing her art supplies there was temporary, just until they could afford a proper studio. Those art supplies were actually precursor chemicals for methamphetamine production. She'd been using my basement to cook drugs while I slept upstairs, completely unaware that my home had become a crime scene. Josh had installed hidden cameras throughout the house, recording every transaction, every phone call, every moment of criminal activity. He'd worn a wire to family dinners, to arguments, to intimate conversations. For 8 months, he'd lived as a double agent in his own home, gathering evidence that would eventually bring down not just Megan, but her entire network of accomplices. The fake pregnancy had been Megan's exit strategy. She'd planned to disappear with Emily and Brian, taking the insurance money from my accidental death and the proceeds from selling my house. The death certificate I'd found wasn't just a prop. It was her timeline. She'd been planning to poison me slowly, making it look like natural causes, then claim inheritance as Josh's grieving girlfriend. But Josh's investigation had uncovered something even more sinister. Megan wasn't working alone. She was part of a sophisticated elder abuse ring that included corrupt bank officials, forged document specialists, and even a dirty funeral director who helped stage deaths and handle fraudulent insurance claims. The money in my basement wasn't just random cash. It was payment for services rendered, evidence of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Every dollar was photographed, every serial number recorded, every transaction traced back to previous victims who'd suffered the same fate I'd narrowly escaped. The federal task force had been building cases against 12 different perpetrators across multiple states. Josh's evidence became the cornerstone of prosecutions that would eventually result in over 200 years of combined prison sentences. But the cost had been enormous. While working undercover, Josh had been forced to participate in activities that sickened him. He'd had to forge documents, lie to banks, and even help plan aspects of crimes he was secretly documenting. The psychological toll was devastating. He'd developed anxiety, depression, and a drinking problem that he hid from everyone, including the FBI handlers who debriefed him weekly. He'd lost weight, lost sleep, and lost himself in the role he was playing. Some nights he'd sit in his car outside my house, wanting to run inside and confess everything. but knowing that doing so would destroy months of careful work and potentially cost lives. The investigation had expanded beyond financial fraud. They'd uncovered human trafficking, drug manufacturing, and even suspected murders in other states. What had started as a simple con game had revealed a criminal network that reached into the highest levels of local government and law enforcement. Josh's testimony would eventually lead to the arrests of a county commissioner, 3 bank executives, and a judge who'd been rubber-stamping fraudulent documents for years. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, and my son had been living at the center of it, playing a role that required him to betray everyone he loved in order to protect them. The trials began 18 months after that terrible night when Josh kicked me out of my own home. I sat in the witness stand, looking directly at Megan as she tried to maintain her innocent facade. Gone was the sweet daughter-in-law who'd baked cookies and played with Emily. In her place sat a cold, calculating predator who'd made a career out of destroying families. Her defense attorney painted me as a vindictive old woman seeking revenge against her son's girlfriend. But the evidence was overwhelming. Hours of recorded conversations, financial documents, photographs of the meth lab equipment, and testimony from 11 other victims across 7 states. The jury saw through her lies within minutes. But the most damning evidence came from Josh himself. He took the stand and methodically walked through 8 months of documented criminal activity. His voice never wavered as he described watching Megan plan my murder, forge documents in my name, and discuss the best ways to dispose of my body after the poisoning. "She showed me photographs of previous victims," Josh testified, his eyes never leaving the jury. "She was proud of her work. She called them practice runs for what she planned to do to my mother. She said elderly people were easy targets because their children usually didn't visit enough to notice the signs." The courtroom was silent as Josh described finding the insurance policies Megan had taken out on my life, the fake medical records she'd created to support a claim of dementia, and the detailed timeline she'd developed for my gradual decline and eventual death. "She had it all planned out," he continued. "The funeral arrangements, the will contest, even the real estate listing for my mother's house. She'd done this before successfully, at least 6 times that we know of. My mother was just supposed to be victim number 7. The prosecution played recordings of Megan discussing the murder with Brian, her real husband and accomplice. Their casual conversation about handling the old lady and making it look natural sent chills through the courtroom. They talked about my death the way most people discuss weekend plans. But the most devastating moment came when they played the recording of Megan explaining her method to Josh. "The beauty of slow poisoning is that it mimics natural aging. A little arsenic in her tea, some antifreeze in her orange juice, and within 6 months, she'll look like she's dying of natural causes. The family always feels guilty afterward, like they should have spent more time with her." Emily's testimony was heartbreaking. At 4 years old, she couldn't understand the complexity of what had happened, but she could describe the special medicine Megan had tried to give me, the conversations about making Grandma Linda go to sleep forever, and the way Brian had taught her to call different men Daddy, depending on who was around. The child psychologist who interviewed Emily discovered that she'd been trained to lie about her parentage, coached to remember false stories about her relationship with Josh, and even taught to steal small items from me to help Mommy with her collection. She'd been turned into an unwitting accomplice in her own family's destruction. Brian Matthews, Megan's real husband, had already pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony against the larger network. He described a sophisticated operation that had been targeting elderly parents for over a decade, with Megan as their most successful operative. Her specialty was long-term infiltration of families, gaining trust over months or years before striking. The financial evidence was staggering. Megan had stolen over $3.2 million from 12 different families, not including the value of homes, jewelry, and personal property. She'd ruined credit, destroyed inheritances, and left a trail of broken families in her wake. But perhaps the most chilling testimony came from the coroner, who'd handled 3 of her previous victims' deaths. Upon exhumation and retesting, all 3 showed signs of slow poisoning that had been missed during the original autopsies. These weren't natural deaths. They were murders that had gone undetected for years. As the evidence mounted, Megan's composure finally cracked. She began crying, claiming she'd been coerced by Brian, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. But the recorded conversation told a different story. She'd been the mastermind, the one who'd perfected the technique and trained others to replicate it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, identity theft, drug manufacturing, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole, calling her a predator who systematically destroyed the most sacred bonds of family trust. The day of Megan's sentencing should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like mourning. As I watched her being led away in shackles, I realized that justice doesn't undo damage. It just prevents future harm. The scars she'd left on our family would take years to heal, if they ever healed at all. Josh sat beside me in the courtroom, holding my hand like he used to do during thunderstorms when he was little. But he wasn't little anymore, and the storms we'd weathered together had changed us both in ways we were still discovering. The man who'd sacrificed everything to protect me was also the man who'd had to deceive me so completely that I'd questioned my own sanity. "Mom," he whispered as the judge read the sentence, "I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay since this whole thing started, and I don't know if I ever will be." That evening, we sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where he'd told me about his first girlfriend and his dreams for the future. Now we were trying to figure out how to be a family again after everything that had happened. "The worst part wasn't lying to you," Josh said, staring at his hands. "It was watching you suffer and not being able to help. Every time you looked at me with disappointment or hurt, I wanted to tell you the truth. But I knew that if I did, she'd disappear and probably kill you before the FBI could build their case." He described the therapy sessions with FBI psychologists, the medication he'd been prescribed to deal with the stress, the nights he'd driven to my house just to sit in the driveway and make sure I was safe. He'd been living in constant fear that Megan would accelerate her timeline, that something would go wrong, that he'd lose me before justice could be served. "I recorded everything," he continued, pulling out his phone and showing me months of audio files. "Every conversation, every argument, every moment I thought I might never see you again. I couldn't write letters or keep a journal because she might find them, but I could record my thoughts for you." He played one of the recordings, dated 3 months before the eviction. "Mom, if you're hearing this, it means everything worked out and you're safe. I know you hate me right now, and I don't blame you. I hate myself too. But I need you to know that every single day, I think about the mother who sang me to sleep, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, who never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself. I'm trying to be the man you raised me to be, even if it means you'll never forgive me for what I had to do." The tears came then, for both of us. Months of suppressed emotion, fear, and regret poured out in that kitchen. We cried for the time we'd lost, for the trust that had been broken, for the innocence that could never be recovered. But we also cried for Emily, who was slowly learning to trust again in her new foster home. The adoption process was complicated by the criminal case, but Josh was determined to become her legal father, despite the lack of biological connection. "She's been through enough," he said. "She deserves stability, even if I can't give her everything she needs right now." The money from the FBI reward sat untouched in a bank account. Josh refused to spend it, saying it felt like blood money. "I don't want to profit from what happened to you," he explained. "That money represents the worst year of both our lives." Instead, we decided to use it to start a foundation for elder abuse victims. We'd seen firsthand how sophisticated these operations could be, how easily loving families could be destroyed by predators who understood exactly how to exploit our deepest bonds and vulnerabilities. The foundation would provide legal aid, counseling, and financial assistance to families who'd been targeted by similar schemes. We'd also work with law enforcement to improve training on elder abuse recognition and prevention. But the most important work would be helping other families heal from the trauma of discovering that their loved ones had been victims. The shame, the guilt, the self-doubt. We understood all of it because we'd lived it ourselves. As we sat in that kitchen, making plans for the future, I realized that what Megan had meant to destroy, she'd ultimately made stronger. Josh and I were closer now than we'd been in years, united by shared trauma and the knowledge that we'd survived something that had broken other families apart. Today, 3 years later, Josh and I run a support group for financial abuse victims. We meet every Tuesday at the community center, sharing stories with other families who've learned the hard way that love can be weaponized by those who understand how to exploit it. Emily, now 7, calls me Grandma Linda, and Josh, Daddy Josh. The adoption was finalized last year, and she's thriving in therapy and school. She still has nightmares sometimes, but she's learning to trust again. Family isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up, especially when it's hard. The basement has been completely renovated. We turned it into a playroom for Emily and a home office where Josh and I coordinate our foundation work. Sometimes I catch myself looking at those walls and remembering what they once hid. But mostly, I see the future we're building together. Josh still goes to therapy twice a week. The experience of living undercover in his own life left scars that may never fully heal. But he's learned to forgive himself for the deception. And more importantly, I've learned to forgive him for the pain it caused me. We found something in that basement that Megan never knew about. A false wall where my mother had hidden $500,000 in cash, and a letter explaining that it was money she'd saved instead of paying my father's gambling debts. Use it to protect your family when they need it most, she'd written. Even from beyond the grave, my mother had been planning our salvation. The foundation has helped over 200 families recover from financial abuse. We've lobbied for stronger laws, trained law enforcement, and created a network of resources for victims. But the most important thing we've done is prove that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals. I'm Linda, 68 years old now, and I'm nobody's victim. Sometimes the person you think betrayed you is actually the one who saved you. And sometimes the best revenge is discovering that you were never as alone as you thought.